The God's First Morning. Between the wakings of the worlds and the long history of the after, there was one specific morning, the first full day of 10,000 former administrators being people again, and the records of it are scattered, fragmentary, and stranger than anything else in the archive, because nobody was assigned to observe it. Every chronicler was busy. The new world was hours old, and so the God's first morning survives only in incidental accounts, asides, marginalia, and Maya, who spent years gathering them, keeps them in a folder she labeled, with her pencil's usual precision, "What Omnipotence Does with a Tuesday." This chapter is that folder. The first finding, they cued. It is the detail every account converges on, and no one predicted. 10,000 beings who had folded through space, administered realities, deleted errors with a gesture, and on the first morning of personhood, on 40 worlds at once, the overwhelmingly documented behavior is queuing. At the meal lines of the hill, at the Home for the Dead's newly lit galleries, outside the office of a council that had no procedures for them yet. The boy of Thren, 14 again in all the ways that mattered, stood 90 minutes in the porridge line on the hill, declining, politely, 17 separate offers to be moved to the front, and when Grace Okafor finally demanded to know why a being who had administered worlds wouldn't accept a bowl out of turn, his answer went around the planet by sundown and is, the folder argues, the skeleton key to the whole morning. "Ma'am, I've spent 400 years going directly to the front of everything. The front of everything is where the chair is." He shuffled forward 6 inches with the line, visibly savoring it. "Do you know what's in a queue? Company. You stand in the middle of people, at people speed, and the line moves because everyone agrees it moves, and nobody's position depends on erasing anybody. I have been studying this line for an hour. It's a masterpiece. And at the end, there's porridge you waited for, next to people who waited too. We didn't fall from the heights, ma'am. We were released from them. The queue is the proof. You can't queue alone." The second finding, they were, almost universally, drawn to maintenance. Not grandeur, repair. The folder bulges with it, gods asking, shyly, on their first morning, to be shown how to mend nets, clear gutters, wash dishes. Above all, dishes. The dishwashing accounts number in the hundreds, and the explanation, when an emissary finally thought to ask for one, came from the gardener of Aubrey herself. Elbow deep in the hill's washwater, we spent an age making problems cease. Deletion, resolution, administration, the cold crafts, the verbs that end things. A dish is the opposite verb. You wash it because it was used. It was used because someone ate. Someone ate because someone cooked. And tomorrow, it will all need doing again. And the again is the point. The again is the thing we forgot existed. Work that comes back is work that means the world is continuing. Every plate in this water is a small certificate that the people are still alive. I administered the gravity of moons, friend. It never once felt like this much traction. And the third finding, the one Maya placed last in the folder, the one the chapter is for. On that first morning, on every world, independently, without coordination, the waking gods began to seek each other out. Not for counsel, not for organization, but for a specific exchange that the incidental accounts kept capturing in fragments until the pattern stood out like a watermark. One god would approach another, strangers, often, colleagues of an age who had never once spoken person to person, and ask, in whatever language the world offered, some version of the same question. Were you there for mine? Did you process my world? Did I process yours? And then, having established the terrible bookkeeping, the two would stand together, sometimes for hours, doing the thing the accounts describe with humble, inadequate words, talking quietly, holding forearms, standing. The warden, asked about it years later, supplied the missing interior.
"We were the only ones who could absolve each other. No, absolve is the chair's word. Strike it. We were the only ones who could accompany each other. Every waking god, that first morning, did the arithmetic you did on your futon, Eli. the count, the ledger, the magnitude, and reached for the one demographic in the universe with the same arithmetic. The mortals could forgive us, and did, with a generosity I still cannot hold steadily. But forgiveness from outside the ledger weighs different. What we needed, the first morning, was the colleague, the one who'd run the same numbers and was also still standing. You built a whole institution on this eventually. Your order of the water, you're next to each other, in the water, indefinitely, and I have never told you that the gods invented it, amateurishly, by instinct, at scale, on day one, in 40 languages at once. It was the first thing we made as free beings, a guild of the unforgivable, holding forearms. It seemed.
And the old voice carried, for once, something adjacent to pride.
A reasonable place to begin.
One fragment more, and the chapter closes, because Maya marked it in the folder as the keeper. An account from a fishing town on a far coast of our world, recorded by a child, later grown, of the god assigned by no one to her village, a gray figure who had simply walked there, that first morning, following the coastline away from the crowds, and stopped at the seawall where the town's nets hung drying, and stood. The child, 8, fearless the way the war's last children were, had gone out to inspect the apparition, and found it crying at the nets, and asked it the village's first question, which was not "Who are you?" or "What do you want?" but the coast's hard courtesy, "Have you eaten?" And the god had looked down at her, 10,000 years of administered endings behind its eyes, on the first morning of the rest of everything, and given the answer Maya says the whole folder, the whole morning, the whole strange first Tuesday of the redeemed universe, folds down into. No, the god said, not for a very long time, I think, checking the sentence for truth, finding it held, I think that's been the whole problem. She took it home. Her mother set a place. It stayed 40 years, the village's net mender, its weather eye, its quietest resident, buried at last by the seawall under a stone the town chose together, and the stone does not say a god rests there, because by then nobody thought of it as one. The stone says what the folder says, what the first morning proved on 40 worlds at once, what this whole book has been circling since a starving thing came off a core mound like a thrown axe, and was fed instead of fought. He hadn't eaten. We fed him. Everything after was ordinary, which was the miracle. Chapter 39. The First True Dawn. On the hill, the night ended. Sela told me this part, because I was not there. I was at the top of the tower, spending the last of myself, and Sela counted it, the way she counted everything, and what she counted was the most important number in 406 worlds, the moment the count stopped. For 64 loops, the count in the corner of every survivor's vision had been a ledger of the dead, scrolling its small punctual obituaries through every night. On the hill, on the last night, 370-some kept names had held each other against the descent of every god in the apocalypse for 91 minutes, and the count had held with them, and then, at the instant of the spending, the instant the grief went out across the worlds, the count had done something it had never done in 406 integrations. It changed.
Day 1. And then, below it, where the obituaries had always scrolled, the hunger is grieving. The hunger is being held. The tide is going out and it is not coming back. Sentience surviving in Sector Ashford, 374. Sentience expected to survive the night, every night, from this night forward. 374. There is no next wave. There is no next dawn that resets. This is the first true dawn. Welcome to it.
Sela said the gods on the hill, the gray administrators, hundreds of them, who had been reaching gray hands toward the kept names for 91 minutes. Sela said they stopped, all at once, mid-reach, and the gray went out of them like a tide, and underneath were people, hundreds of people, weeping, looking at their own hands as if they had never seen them, looking at the hill full of mortals they had been trying to delete. And the first thing the waking gods did, every one of them, across the whole hill, was lower their hands and sit down, because the grief had come home, and you cannot delete anything when you are busy grieving. And the second thing they did was look at the meal that 400 people had been about to share. The hearthfire meal. The table Hearthhold had set even in the middle of the siege, and one of the waking gods, a woman who had been, an hour before, a cold gray hand reaching for the Reynoso child, one of the waking gods said, in a voice cracked with a grief 406 worlds old, is there room? At the table? For us? We forgot how to be invited. Is there still room? And Sela Ardent, the warlord who refused her crown, the quartermaster of the hill, the woman who had spent 15 years being put outside everyone's wall and had sworn to put no one outside hers, looked at the hundreds of waking gods, the things that had been deleting her people a minute before, the cold administrators of 406 apocalypses, weeping now and asking to be let in. And she did the thing that I think is the truest measure of who she had become, the thing that finished the work Floor 6 had started. And she said, without hesitation, in a voice that carried across the whole blazing hill,
There's always room. Pull up. Della, Marcus, get more benches. Somebody find the rest of the stew. We've got...
She looked at the hundreds of weeping gods, and her competent, furious voice did not break, but it bent. It bent all the way.
We've got a lot of people to feed. Everybody eats. Nobody outside the wall. Not tonight. Not ever again. That's the rule of this hill. Everybody eats.
I want you to hold that image, because it is the image the whole book was climbing toward, and I was not there to see it, and Selah gave it to me afterward like a gift, and I am giving it to you the same way. A hill, at the first true dawn. A hearthright's wall, holding 400 kept names, and hundreds of waking gods, and a nation of the underpeople, and a spent brave lizard, sitting down together at the longest table Hearthhold had ever set, in the gray-gold light of a dawn that would not reset, sharing a meal, the hearthfire meal, the meal that was always the answer, the meal the card had been about since the bottom of the larder, while out beyond the wall, the choir's tide went out, and did not come back, and the delver slept gorged and full in the deep, and the seams in the sky closed one by one, like eyes finally able to rest, and the hunger that had eaten 406 worlds sat down inside 10,000 grieving hearts, and was, for the first time since the first world ended, held. Mrs. Adeyemi was at that table. Selah made sure I knew that. Mrs. Adeyemi, who had sat down in the street and died to a bruise-colored thing on 64 first mornings. Mrs. Adeyemi was at the table, alive, on the first true dawn, complaining that the stew needed salt, and the boy I had saved in the bank on the very first morning, the kid whose name I never learned, was at the table too, and his name was Theo. Selah learned his name. Selah learned everyone's names, the way I had taught her without ever teaching her. And Theo was at the table, and Pilar Reynoso was at the table with her fever broken, and Grace Okafor was at the table with her son James, who had not died at 1151, because there was no more 1151, and Dub's whole nation was at the table, the underpeople sitting above ground in the open dawn, for the first time in 10,000 years of fleeing, invited, and Gravy was under the table eating everything anyone dropped, and it was, Selah said, the best meal anyone on that hill had ever eaten, and it was the first of all the meals that came after, the first shared dawn of a world that no longer ended. The apocalypse was over, not won, ended, which is different, which is better. We had not beaten the dark. We had done the thing the first winner could not do at the beginning of everything. We had grieved it, together, until it stopped being hungry. And the count in the corner of every eye on the hill, which had been a ledger of the dead for 406 worlds, scrolled one last line, and then went quiet forever, and the line it scrolled was not an obituary. It was the only thing the system ever wrote that Maya did not have to translate, because it was already in plain words, the plainest the machine ever used, And Sela said every survivor on the hill read it at once, and every one of them understood it. And it is the line I have asked to be the last line of every copy of the story Maya keeps.
Everybody eats. Nobody outside the wall. Welcome to the first true dawn. The table is set. There is room for you. There was always room. We are so sorry it took so long to remember.
The standing down. Between the first true dawn and the long work of the after, there was an event I have never given its own account, because it happened across the whole sky of 40 worlds at once, and I watched it from one hillside, with my memory 6 hours old, the standing down of the towers. The histories compress it, the floors unment themselves gently, and the compression loses the hour itself, which those who stood the hill describe as the strangest and most beautiful of the entire war, stranger than the beacon, stranger than the gray rain, and Sela, whose slate had gone quiet at 0:51, and whose hands therefore had nothing to hold for the first time in 11 days, watched all of it, and gave me her account in the same season she gave me the 91 minutes, and it belongs in the record entire.
It started a little after the first light.
She told me.
The spindle had been dark all night, the gods down here, the heights empty, then the galleries kindling floor by floor when the grief went home. So by dawn, the whole tower stood lit like a window wall, and we'd stopped looking at it. Honestly, there was a hill full of weeping gods and 400 survivors to feed. The tower was yesterday's problem. And then Hollis. Of course Hollis. The builder heard it before anyone saw anything. Hollis straightened up over the commissary line and said, "Quiet, quiet. The stone's doing something." And we all heard it. A sound like, the closest I can give you is the sound the beacon made when the meaning ran up the channels, but backward. Descending. The spindle was ringing, very low, top to bottom, floor after floor, each tone a little lower, like something enormous counting down its own height. And where each tone passed, the tower changed. Not collapsed, never collapsed. Nothing fell the whole hour. The floors, where the ringing passed through them, went simple. That's the only word the hill ever agreed on. You'd see a tier of that terrible architecture, the trial walls, the gates, the machinery of the worthy, and the tone would pass through it, and it would stand there one heartbeat longer as what it had been, and then it was just stone. Honest stone, plain spans, the cruelty gone out of the shapes, the way the gray went out of the gods. The same event, we all understood, watching. The same event at architectural scale. The tower was being given back its grief too, or giving up its orders. Hollis stood there with his hand over his mouth, and the only thing he said the whole hour, I logged it. The slate was quiet. Old habits, he said. It's not being demolished. It's being released. Somebody just told the building it can stop holding the posture. Look at it. Look at it, Sela. The thing was at attention for 10,000 years, and somebody finally said at ease.
Hold, until they remember. The husk's 4 words, the first instruction under every floor anyone added. And on the morning the remembering came, the oldest standing order in the universe completed, and the towers of 40 worlds, all at once, in descending tones, stood down. Cass confirmed the mechanism later. In the substrate terms, the floor's cruelty had been meaning, the administrator's meaning, an age of it, worthiness and filtering poured into stone by the smoothed, and meaning answers to the meaner, and the meaners, waking, grieving, withdrew it. 10,000 gods, in their first hour of personhood, each performed without coordination the same first act. They reached into the architecture that bore their old signature and took the cruelty back out, the way you'd take your own knife back from a wall. The standing down was not the tower's mercy. It was 10,000 simultaneous individual retractions, the waking god's first apology, issued in the only language stone accepts. And the hill, this is the part Sela made me promise to render exactly. The hill, watching the tower of their 11 days' terror ring itself simple in the morning light, did not cheer.
You'd expect cheering.
She said,
The instrument of the whole war, disarming itself in plain sight. That's a cheering event by every law of crowds I know, and I know them all. Nobody cheered. The whole hill went quiet instead. The gods quietest of all, and what it felt like, I've had 30 years to find the words. It felt like watching someone you'd feared your whole life take off a uniform. There's no triumph in it. There's just the person underneath, suddenly, smaller than the uniform ever let them be, and the terrible understanding that the person was in there the entire time.
She was silent a while, the way she gets at the bottom of the slate.
Mrs. Adeyemi broke it, in the end. The quiet. Of course she did. The last tone went out of the tower. The ground note, the lowest one. The whole spindle standing there plain and tall and harmless. First harmless thing that size in the history of the worlds. And into the hush, from the commissary line, in exactly the voice she used for the morning's first customer. Adayeze Adeyemi said, "Well, there's a building that could use a coffee." And the hill laughed. 400 survivors and 1,000 weeping gods, laughing together at the foot of the disarmed apocalypse. And that was the actual end of the war, if you want my professional assessment as the keeper of the only continuous log. Not the spending, not the dawn, the laugh. Wars end when the survivors make the first joke at the monster's expense, and the monster.
And Sella smiled, the audit complete, the books balanced at last.
The monster, being family now, has to stand there and take it. It took it well, for the record. It's taken it well for 30 years. It's a good building, now that somebody let it be one. They all were, probably. All the monsters, all the towers, all the gray. Good things, held in a bad posture. For so long they forgot there was another one. File that wherever you file the biggest findings. Eli. The war's last datum. Almost nothing we fought was evil. It was clenched. And the whole arsenal that won, the stew, the names, the second bar, the chairs, every weapon we ever fielded, was just some way of saying at ease to something that had forgotten it could be. Write the book so they can hear it, whoever's still clenched, wherever they're reading. At ease. At ease. It's over. It stayed. You can put the posture down. That's the whole dispatch. Send it.
Chapter 40. The Cost. I have been putting off the hardest chapter, and I cannot put it off any longer, because you have noticed, you are a careful reader, you have climbed this far, that I keep saying I was not there. I was not on the hill for the first true dawn. I did not see the wakings. Sela told me, Ren told me, Maya wrote it down. And you have been wondering why the man who climbed the whole tower was not present for the one morning it was all for. Here is why. This is the cost. I warned you, in part 2, that keepsake would cost me more than any other card, and that it was the hinge the whole ending turned on. And now you are at the hinge, and I owe you the truth. Because I have owed you the truth since the first dawn. And the system taught me that you give people the truth, even when it is the shape of a grave. To spend keepsake, to give the whole ledger away, to divide the universe's grief among every living soul, I had to empty myself completely. The whole ledger. Every gram of conserved memory and meaning I had carried across 64 loops. And the ledger was not just the grief of the dead, it was everything. It was the only thing that had ever crossed the dawn. It was, in the most literal and total sense, me. Not my body, which stood in the smoothing room with Maya's hand on its arm, but the conserved soul of me, the part that had looped, the part that remembered, the part that was the keeper of the dead. When I gave it all away, I gave away myself. I do not remember the loops. I am writing this, the whole book, all 406 worlds of it, every death and every dawn, and I do not remember a single moment of it. I am writing it from the account Maya kept. Every word of this story that you have read, The first death and the wall of sand and Dub's glasses and gravy at the bottom of the larder and the third mirror and the warden and the spending. I know all of it, the way you know a story. Someone you love has told you so many times that it has become yours, but it is not mine. Not from the inside, because the inside of it went out across the worlds in the spending and never came back. I gave away my own memory, along with everyone else's grief, because they were the same thing, because I was the ledger, because to empty the ledger was to empty me. I woke, on the first true dawn, on the floor of the smoothing room, empty. Maya was there. Maya was the first thing I saw, on the first true dawn, looking down at me with the tired triage eyes, and I did not know her. That is the cost. I want you to sit in it the way I have had to sit in it. I climbed 64 loops. I learned 400 names. I earned a goblin's trust 64 times, and a healer's love across more dawns than I can count, and a warlord's redemption, and a lizard's whole brave heart, and I carried every gram of it, alone, in the loneliest place in the world, and I refused. For 64 loops, against the chair, against the third mirror, against the warden himself, I refused to put any of it down. And then, at the very end, to save them, I put all of it down at once. Everything, including them, including the carrying that had been the whole of who I was. I gave away the loops to give back the grief, and the loops were me. And so the man who woke on the floor of the smoothing room on the first true dawn was a man who had climbed the whole tower and could not remember climbing it, who had loved a whole world across 64 deaths and could not remember loving it, who looked up at the most important person in 406 worlds and saw a kind stranger.
Hi.
Maya said gently, to the empty man on the floor, the man who had been the keeper of the dead and was now, himself, one of the forgotten. She did not cry. She told me later she wanted to, more than she had ever wanted to cry about anything, but she did not, because she had a job to do, the most important job there had ever been, and crying could come after.
My name is Maya. You don't know me yet. That's okay. You knew me 64 times, and you're going to know me again, because I know the whole story now, and I'm going to tell it to you, all of it, the way you told it to me, on a walk through a doomed town on the last morning of the world.
She held up something, small, cracked, folded with enormous care.
A goblin gave you these. His name is Dub. You don't remember him yet. You're going to love him. He gave you these the first time you met him, across a fire, because they were the most valuable thing he owned, and you carried them through 64 ends of the world, and then you gave everything away to save everyone, and the last thing left in your pocket was the glasses, because they're a physical object. And physical objects don't reset anymore, because there's no more resetting, because you ended it.
She put Dub's cracked glasses into my empty hand, on the first true dawn, and folded my fingers over them, the way she had folded my fingers over Keepsake on the 9th landing, and she said the thing that turned the cost from a tragedy into the last and best inversion of the whole story.
You spent your whole apocalypse being the only one who remembered, the keeper of the dead, the one place everyone was saved. And it was so lonely, Eli. You have no idea how lonely, because you gave away the memory of how lonely it was. It was the loneliest thing anyone has ever done, remembering everyone, alone, across 64 deaths.
Her voice was steady and merciless and kind, the fixed star, and now it was wet too, just at the edge.
So here's what happens now. Now I remember. Now I'm the keeper. And I am going to do for you exactly what you did for everyone else, for 64 loops, without ever once getting it back. I'm going to show up, every day, and tell you who you are. And earn you, from a stranger, as many times as it takes. You re-earned Dub 64 times, because he forgot you every dawn. Well,
She laughed, wetly, and it was the laugh that had made the whole apocalypse bearable. The laugh I did not remember and was, even empty, already beginning to love.
Ev, you're the one who forgot. And I'm not going anywhere. So I'm going to tell you the story of yourself every morning for as long as it takes. And you're never going to be the only one who remembers again. Because that was always the whole point. That was always the only thing anyone needed saving from.
I looked at the cracked glasses in my hand. I did not remember the goblin. I did not remember the fire. I did not remember the 64 ends of the world, or the wall of sand, or the bottom of the larder, or the long loop, or the warden, or the spending. But I held the glasses, and a stranger with the kindest, tiredest eyes I had ever seen told me they mattered, and something in me, not the ledger was gone, something under the ledger, in the bedrock, in the part of me that had been a person before it was ever a keeper, believed her. The way Dub had believed me, across a fire, with no memory and no proof. The way trust works when it has been practiced so many times that it becomes a substance. Okay, I said to Maya, on the first true dawn, the first word of the rest of my life. Tell me the whole thing. Who was I? Who were they? Tell me everything. And she did. She has been telling me ever since. This book is her telling it, written down so I will never have to be told it from scratch again. So the story is in more than one place now. So no one, not even me, ever has to be the only one who remembers. That is the cost, and that is the gift. And they are, as the warden learned, as Cass learned, as I learned and then forgot, and am learning again, the same thing. The cost of loving everyone is that you cannot carry it alone. The gift is that you were never supposed to. Chapter 41. Learning Myself. What is it like to be told the story of your own soul by someone who loves you? I am the only person who has ever been in a position to answer that precisely, and so I am going to try, because it is the strangest and gentlest thing that has happened to me, and because if there is anyone reading this who has lost themselves, to time, to injury, to the slow tide that takes the old, to any of the 1,000 ways a person can become a stranger to their own history, I want them to know what I learned on the long, slow mornings after the first true dawn, that you are not only the story you can remember, you are also the story that is kept of you, by the people who stayed, and that story is no less yours for living in someone else's mouth. Maya told it to me in order. She was rigorous about that. She was a paramedic. She did everything in order: ABCs, scene safety, history of present illness. She started at 6:14 on the first morning, the futon, the light resolving, and she walked me through all of it across the long convalescent weeks on the hill, a little each day, the way I had once spread 64 loops thin across the dawns, so the weight wouldn't kill me. She spread my own life thin enough for me to bear, and fed it back to me in survivable pieces, and I want to tell you about the 3 moments in the retelling that brought the most back, because they taught me what back even means, for a man who gave his memories away. The first was Dub. Maya took me down off the hill, in the second week, to meet the Goblin Nation, who lived above ground now, in the open, in a settlement they were building on the south slope with Hollis's help, the underpeople learning sunlight after 10,000 years. And she did not tell me, in advance, what to feel. She just walked me down to where a small green creature with a notched ear sat in the actual daylight, squinting at the sun he had spent his whole species' history hiding from, and she said,
Eli, this is Dub. Dub, this is Eli. He doesn't remember you. He gave away his memories to end the apocalypse. I've been telling him the story.
And Dub, who did remember me now, because the new world let everyone keep everything, because there was no more resetting, because the keeper of the dead had ended the forgetting for everyone but himself, Dub looked at me with his whole notched-eared face, and he did the thing I had apparently done to him 64 times and never once gotten back. He started over. He reached up, with enormous care, and took off the new reading glasses he was wearing. Real ones, prescription, made for him by a world that finally counted the Verge folk as people, and he folded them, and he held them out to me across the space between us. A gift, the most valuable thing he owned. And he said, In careful traded Creole, the words Maya told me he had said the very first time, in a loading dock, across a fire.
Dub,
He tapped his chest, then he tapped mine.
keeper of the dead, you came down into the dark for us when no one ever had. You do not remember. It does not matter. We remember. The whole nation remembers. You earned us 64 times, and we will spend the rest of our lives earning you back, one telling at a time, until the story is as much yours as ours. That is the Verge folk way. That is what we have always done with the ones we lose. We keep them, out loud, together, until losing them stops meaning they are gone.
He pressed the folded glasses into my hand, beside the cracked ones I already carried and did not understand.
Welcome back, keeper of the dead. Take your time. We have nothing but time now. You gave us that. You gave us time.
I did not remember Dub, but I held 2 pairs of glasses, the cracked and the whole, the old gift and the new, and I wept. Empty, knowing nothing. I wept. And Maya said that was the moment she first believed I would come all the way back, because the ledger was gone but the weeping wasn't, the capacity for it, the bedrock thing under the memory, the part of me that had always known that a folded pair of glasses held across a space was the most valuable thing in any world. You can take a man's memories. You cannot, it turns out, take what the memories made of him. I did not remember being a keeper of the dead, but I had been one so thoroughly, for so long, that being one had stopped being something I remembered and become something I was, and that survived the spending, the way steadfast had survived the dawn, woven into the grain of me too deep to give away. The second moment was gravy, and I will be brief, because some things are too large for many words. Maya did not have to introduce me to Gravy. Gravy introduced himself. On the 3rd morning, before Maya had told me anything about a beast, I woke in the farmhouse to a weight on my chest, and a low, warbling croon, and an enormous, greasy reptilian head pressed against me, and 2 huge yellow eyes watching me with an expression of grievance and gratitude, and absolute, unshakable ownership. And I did not remember him. I did not know his name. I knew nothing. And I reached up, without thinking, with a hand that remembered what the rest of me had forgotten, and I scratched the ridge of his ridiculous beak, in exactly the spot, in exactly the way, and Gravy made the sound that meant, "There you are. I have been waiting. The world ended and you forgot it, but you did not forget how to scratch my beak." And Maya, watching from the doorway, finally cried. Because the bond had crossed. That was the thing. Gravy was held in my resonance, and my resonance had gone out across the worlds in the spending. But a bond, it turns out, is not a memory. A bond is a circuit, a thing between 2 souls, and you cannot give away your half of a circuit because it isn't only yours. Gravy had kept his half, and his half, pressed against my chest on the 3rd morning, was enough to close the loop, and my hand remembered what my mind could not, and the lizard and I were, in the most literal sense the new world could measure, still bonded, still each other's, still, after everything, after the spending, after the end of all memory, not alone.
He's the only one who didn't have to re-earn you.
Maya said, wiping her face.
Because he never knew you through your memory. He knew you through your hands. And you kept your hands.
She laughed, wet.
You gave away 64 loops and a whole universe of grief, and the entire ledger of your soul, Eli Vance. And you kept the exact muscle memory for scratching a buzzard lizard's beak. If that's not the most you thing in this whole story, I don't know what is.
The 3rd moment was Maya herself, and it did not come for a long time, and when it came it was not a memory. It was a choice. She had told me, by then, the whole story, including her own part in it, including every loop she had died in, including Find Me Anyway, every time, Promise, including the walk through the doomed town where I told her everything, including the 9th landing where she said I'll hold the story, go give the gods their dead, I've got ours. She told me all of it, honestly, including the part where, across 64 loops, I had loved her, and she had, across the loops she remembered, which was only the last one, the only one anyone but me had ever carried, begun, on that last long day, to love me back. And then she stopped telling, and she looked at me, the empty man she had spent weeks refilling, and she said,
Here's the part I can't tell you, Eli. Because it's the one part of the story that isn't finished. And it's the one part that has to be yours. New, not given back. You loved me across 64 loops. I can tell you that you did. But I can't make you love me now. That would just be me handing you a feeling the way I've handed you everything else. And a love you only have because someone told you that you used to have it isn't a love, it's an inheritance.
Her tired triage eyes were steady and terrified and kind.
So this is the part where I stop being your keeper, and we just start as us. Now. As two people on a hill at the beginning of a world that doesn't end, who have a whole strange history that only one of us remembers, and all the time there ever was to write a new one that we both will.
She held out her hand, not with glasses in it, not with the story in it, just her hand, open.
Hi, I'm Maya. I think you're worth knowing. Want to find out if I'm right?
I did not remember loving her. I took her hand anyway, on a hill at the first true dawn of a world that would not reset, and I found out. I was right. So was she. That, finally, is a story that is ours, and not the ledger's, and so I will keep it. Out loud, together, the only way anyone keeps anything now. And I will not write it down, because some things you do not give away, not even to the reader, not even to be safe, because the whole lesson of 406 worlds is that a thing kept together, in the open, between people who stay, is the only thing the dark was never able to eat. Interlude. Maya's School. Maya founded the Lifebinder School in the 3rd year of the world that stayed, and ran it for 40, and it is the institution this book has most scandalously neglected. Her own pencil could hardly order its inclusion, and so the omission persisted until Wren, our Wren, the daughter, reviewing the manuscript as the third hand it now needs, wrote in the margin in her mother's exact idiom.
You gave Hollis's Apprentices a chapter, and Set's Craft a chapter, and Audiobook's Desk a chapter. The school that trained the healers of 40 worlds gets a mention. Fix it. And Dad, she won't write it herself, so you'll have to do it badly, and let her correct it. Which, think about it, is the whole method of your entire marriage, and most of this book.
So, the school, written badly, corrected by its founder, the marks left visible where they instruct. The Lifebinder class, the system's name for what Maya became, the spending of one's own resonance to close another's wounds across the air, was, in the old world's records, vanishingly rare, and the rarity puzzled the early council, until Maya, asked to explain her own evolution, identified the gate in one sentence.
The class doesn't unlock on healing skill. I watched it unlock in myself, and I've watched it unlock in every student since. And the trigger is the same every time. It unlocks the first time you spend yourself with no plan for getting it back. That's the whole mechanic. The system reads 1,000 healers doing excellent sustainable work and offers them nothing, and then one exhausted paramedic on an overpass burns tomorrow's strength on today's dying stranger. Not heroically, stupidly. Every protocol says stop. And the class arrives, because the class was never about repair. It's about the universe noticing that you've stopped invoicing it.
Correction. M.O. He makes it sound mystical. It is not mystical. It is the same gate as his wall of sand. Meaning requires stakes. The system pays attention to spending, because spending is the only honest signal in any economy. Also, I was not stupid on the overpass. I was correct, unsustainably. There is a difference, and the school exists in that difference, so get it right in the next paragraph. The school exists in that difference. That is the founding tension Maya built the curriculum around, and what makes it unlike every healing academy in the histories of any world. A Lifebinder's power is unsustainable spending. And a school of unsustainable spending, run naively, is a factory for dead healers. The old world's rare life-binders had burned like their name. Bright, brief, alone, each one igniting on some overpass of their own, and spending down to nothing within a few years. Unteachable, because the gate could not be safely demonstrated, and the practice could not be safely sustained. Maya's insight, and she will correct this, but I am instructed to write badly first, was that the class's fuel economy changes completely in company. A life-binder alone spends from her own reserve and dies of her gift. A life-binder embedded, tithe-threaded, meal-fed, kept, spends from a reserve the whole table continuously refills. The card about dinner was never, for healers, a comfort. It was infrastructure. And so the school's first and unbendable rule, the one that has scandalized visiting dignitaries from a dozen worlds expecting anatomy and ethics, no student practices the binding until they have demonstrated, to the founder's satisfaction, that they can be kept. Not keep others. Every healer arrives oversupplied with that. Be kept. Sit at the table and let it feed you. Be the patient in the practice triads. Ask for help with a dropped bandage, a heavy crate, a bad night. The school drills it, formally, gradedly, the receiving of help, and fails people on it. And the failing is the mercy.
I will not arm a gift that fires your own body as ammunition.
The founder's address to every entering class runs.
Until your body has standing resupply contracts. Show me your people. Show me you let them feed you. Then I'll show you how to spend.
Correction. MO. The address is shorter now. 40 years of revision. It is 4 words.
Spenders must be fed.
The rest, the entering classes teach each other, which was always the design. The curriculum's true final exam is whether the third years feed the first years without being told. They always do. You build the gate into the culture, and then the culture is the school, and the founder can finally retire. Which I did, which he will now claim I never really did. Which she never really did. The school sends its hardest cases up the hill to her still. I have watched her teach the receiving of help to a burned-out God's world healer, at our own kitchen table at 89, by the foolproof method of dropping a spoon and waiting. 40 years, 600 graduates, the Order of the Water's medical wing, the Corps' field healers, the triage doctrine of 40 worlds, and the school's actual legacy, the one Maya names when asked, is none of these. It is a statistic the registry tracks because she made them track it. In 40 years, among 600 practitioners of the most self-spending class the system ever issued, the school has lost to burnout, to the old bright brief alone burning that consumed every life-binder of every previous world. 0. Final correction. MO. He wants to end on the 0, because he is a physicist, and zeros are his idea of poetry. Overruled. End on the motto. The students chose it, 3rd cohort, over my objection that it was sentimental. And they were right, and I was wrong, and it has been over the school door for 37 years, and it is the answer to the overpass, and to the chair, and to every gift on every world that ever ate its bearer. And it is mine, and theirs, and now, properly credited at last, his readers. The candle that is also a hearth does not burn down. Spenders must be fed. Bring your bowl. Chapter 42. Hollis and the World That Stayed. Hollis Reyes lost his rag. I mean that literally, and I mean it as the highest compliment I know how to pay. Because for as long as anyone had known him, Hollis had carried a shop rag, over the shoulder, through the belt, worried between his hands, and he put it down only for things that truly mattered, and after the first true dawn he never picked it up again, because in the world that stayed, everything mattered, and a man cannot keep a rag for special occasions when every single morning is one. The world stayed. That is the plain miracle I have to convey, and it is harder to convey than the apocalypse, because disaster is easy to make vivid, and continuance is not, and yet continuance was the whole prize. The sun came up on the hill, and then it came up again, and the dawns did not reset, and the choir did not come, and the count in the corner of every eye stayed quiet. And slowly, disbelievingly, 370-some survivors and several hundred waking gods, and a nation of the underpeople, began to understand the thing that no one on 406 worlds had ever been allowed to understand, that they had a future, and it was theirs, and it would keep. Hollis understood it first, because Hollis was a builder, and a builder is a person who believes in the future as a professional discipline. While the rest of us were still flinching at every sunset, braced for a tide that no longer came, Hollis was already pacing out foundations.
"Can't live on a war footing forever,"
he said, on maybe the fifth true dawn, squinting east toward the dead Crossroads Mall where the spindle still stood. Changed now, but standing.
"Hearthhold did its job. It was a fort. Forts are for sieges. Siege is over. Now we need a town. Different footings entirely. A fort keeps things out. A town lets things in. Roads, water, trade, strangers, the lot. Whole different engineering."
He grinned. The grin of a man handed the largest and best commission of his life.
"Demanding client just changed the brief on me. Apocalypse to civilization. Finally some interesting work."
I worked beside him, and the work was how I came back to myself, more than any of Maya's tellings. Because I was still a hearthright. That had survived the spending, not the memories, but the class, the grain of it. The thing I was under the things I remembered. I could not have told you a single loop, those first weeks, but I could kneel in the dirt and put my hands on a foundation stone, and mean it, and feel my thread in the hum bend toward the meaning, and raise a wall that knew what it was for. The skill was older than the memory. Hollis would lay the footings and I would mean the structure, and between us, across the first true season, we turned a fort on a hill into the beginnings of a town in a valley, and with every stone I meant, a little more of the person who had meant 64 loops worth of walls came back, not as memory, but as fluency, the way a musician who has forgotten the names of the notes can still, given an instrument, play. And the town we built was strange and unprecedented and exactly right, because of who we built it for. We built it for everyone. That was the rule, Selah's rule, the rule of the hill. Everybody eats, nobody outside the wall, scaled up into civic architecture. We built it for the 370 human survivors. We built it for the underpeople, with deep, cool warrens beneath the bright surface streets, so the Verge folk could live in both worlds at once, sunlight and shadow, the way they had always wanted and never been allowed. And we built it for the gods, the hundreds of waking administrators who had come down to delete us and stayed to grieve, who were now just people, ancient and skill-rich and heartbroken, and slowly, carefully relearning how to live among mortals after an age of cold maintenance. That last was the hard part, and it was Hollis who found the engineering of it, the way he found the engineering of everything.
"Problem with the gods,"
he said,
"is they don't know how to be small. Spent an age being vast and gray and in charge of worlds. Now they're standing around in my town not knowing where to put their hands. You can't just tell a god to relax. You gotta give 'em work. Specific work. Human-sized."
He spat, satisfied, a man with a solution.
"So I've been putting 'em on crews. The gardener from, what world was it? The gold one."
Aubrey, I said. I knew that from Maya's telling.
"Aubrey. Put her on the orchard crew. Woman built a 400-foot table out of grief in the heights of a tower. Turns out she's a hell of a hand with fruit trees, and you should see her face when something she planted comes up green. The boy, the young one, from the canal world, put him on the water crew. Course, kid knows water like nothing I ever seen. He's running drainage for the whole lower town, and he laughs now. You'd never know he was gray a season ago."
Hollis shook his head, wondering at his own work.
"That's the rebuild, kid, not the walls. The walls are easy. The rebuild is giving 10,000 years of bereaved gods something to do with their hands, so they can figure out how to be people again. And it turns out, the thing that teaches you how to be a person is the same thing it always was. Useful work, done alongside other people, for a future you'll get to live in. That's the whole therapy. That's the whole town. That's the whole everything.
He picked up a stone, hefted it, set it true.
Honestly, the apocalypse was simpler, but this is better. Don't tell the apocalypse I said so.
I want to record one thing Hollis said, late, on the night we finished the town's first true public building. Not a wall, not a forge, but a hall. A great roofed hall with the longest table in it that the valley had ever seen. The town's own answer to the table of grief in the heights of the tower. A place where everybody could eat. We stood in it at dusk, the two of us, tired in the good way. And Hollis finally. I saw it, and I have never forgotten it. Empty as I was. Hollis took the rag off his shoulder, the rag he'd carried his whole life, and he hung it on a nail by the door, deliberately, like a man retiring a flag.
There,
he said.
Don't need it anymore. Rags for when you're between jobs, kid. For wiping up and waiting for the next thing to go wrong.
He looked around the hall, at the long table, at the town beyond it that would not end.
I'm not between jobs anymore. There's no next thing going wrong. There's just the next thing. Forever. A whole world of next things, and all of them the good kind.
His voice, which I had never once heard waver in any of Maya's tellings of the apocalypse, wavered now, in peace, which is harder.
Spent 30 years building things and watching them decay, and then 64 loops building things and watching them reset, and I never once, not once, got to build something and just watch it stay.
He put his weathered hand flat on the great table, the way I put my hands on the stones I meant.
It's gonna stay, isn't it, Eli? This time, it's actually gonna stay.
Yeah, I said. I did not remember the apocalypse, but I knew, the way you know bedrock things, that the man beside me had earned this sentence across more years and more worlds than I could give back to him, and I was honored to be the one to say it. It's gonna stay, Hollis. We built the footings right. You taught me that. It's gonna stay. Hollis Reyes nodded, once, and left his rag on the nail, and we walked out of the hall into the first autumn of a world that kept, and behind us the longest table in the valley waited, set, with room at it for everyone, for the next morning, and the next, and all the mornings that the dark had stolen from 406 worlds, and that we were, slowly, stone by stone, and meal by meal, finally allowed to have. Interlude. Hollis's Apprentices. Hollis Reyes trained 41 apprentices in the world that stayed, and the number was not an accident. He chose it, openly.
One for every name on the beacon's first ring.
And when his last apprentice signed papers, in his 89th year, he retired the same week, a man who had hit spec on his final contract, and the school of building he left behind is now, quietly, on every saved world, the way the litany is on every saved world, and nobody calls it a school, and everybody runs on it, and this chapter is an account of what was actually taught, assembled from the apprentices themselves, because Hollis never wrote a word of it down.
Books are for the kid,
he said, meaning me, meaning this.
Buildings are my books. Read those.
But the apprentices kept notes. Apprentices always keep notes. The master's offhand sentences are the curriculum, and they know it even when he doesn't. And after his death, they pooled them, 41 notebooks worth, into a compilation they titled, in pure Hollis idiom, Things He Said While Pointing. The library keeps it beside the dissertation and the slate. It is the third scripture of the New World, the working-class one, and these are the load-bearing selections, with the stories the apprentices attached to them.
Footings first. Always footings. Nobody ever stood in a finished building admiring the footings, and nobody ever stood in a collapsed one admiring anything else.
Taught, every apprentice attests, in the first week, in a hole, with a shovel in the apprentice's hands. He put every one of them, including the two waking gods who apprenticed in his final decade, beings who had administered worlds, into a footing trench in week 1. The god apprentices report he gave them no dispensation and one private addendum, delivered into the trench, quietly.
You two especially. You spent an age at the top of a thing somebody else footed. Time you met the bottom. Everything you'll ever fix is down here. Plumb, level, square. The building doesn't care how you feel about it.
His whole doctrine of honesty, the apprentices say, disguised as masonry. A wall out of plumb is out of plumb regardless of sincerity, effort, or excuse. The level does not negotiate and is not impressed. And every apprentice, somewhere in year 2, had the day where a thing they loved had to come down because it was wrong, and Hollis stood with them while they unbuilt it. He always helped unbuild, never delegated that. Saying the second half of the doctrine,
Tearing out bad work is the trade, kid. Anybody can lay block. The craft is in what you're willing to take down after you've already sweated it up. Same in everything. Ask the town. Build for the back of it.
the deepest Hollis principle, the one the saved world's builders now teach as simply the Reyes rule. He meant the back of the cabinet, the inside of the wall, the joints nobody will ever see. He demanded finish quality on the invisible faces, and the apprentices pushed back, generation after generation. Nobody will ever see it, and got, generation after generation, the same answer, pointing.
You'll see it. Tonight, lying in bed, you'll see it. And 40 years on, some poor soul opens that wall to fix a pipe and meets you. Every hidden face is a letter to whoever opens it. I've opened a lot of walls, kid. You meet the builder every time. Make sure you're somebody worth meeting.
The town hall's walls have been opened 4 times since his death, for repairs. All 4 crews downed tools and called the library first. The interior faces are signed, every apprentice's name, and the date, and, in his own block capitals, the same message each time, addressed forward into the dark of the wall. Still holding? Good. HR.
The client is always scared. The job is the building. The work is the client.
His entire philosophy of people, learned across 30 years of kitchens and extensions and the worst decade of the world, delivered to each apprentice the first time a homeowner wept or raged or changed everything twice. Buildings, he taught, are what people build instead of saying things. The extension is a marriage negotiation. The new kitchen is a grief. The wall is a fear.
You'll spend 10% of every job on structure, and 90% on the unsaid thing the structure is standing in for. Learn to hear it, or stay in the workshop.
Asked once, by the boldest of the 41, what the beacon had been standing in for, he was quiet a while and then said,
Only job I ever did where the unsaid thing and the structure were the same thing. That's why it worked. Don't expect another in your lifetime. Do expect to keep listening. Measure twice, cut once, forgive constantly.
The addendum is his own, and the apprentice's notebooks all mark the same origin. The day an apprentice ruined a beam of hearth metal, irreplaceable, mid-build, and stood waiting for the storm, and Hollis looked at the ruin for a long moment and said,
Well, now we get to find out what the design's made of.
And redesigned around the loss by sundown, and never mentioned it again, except obliquely, that winter, pointing at the redesigned truss, which had become, all the apprentices agree, better.
See that? Wouldn't exist if Markun could cut. Half of every good building is re-roots around somebody's bad day. Same as every good anything. The plan is just the first draft of the re-roots. Forgive constantly, not 'cause it's nice. 'Cause unforgiveness is a load nothing's footed for, and I've watched it take down bigger structures than this. Ask the gods. No, really, ask 'em. 2 of 'em are in the trench out back.
And the last entry of things he said while pointing, the one the compilation closes on, attested by the apprentice who was with him, On a site visit in his 90th year, his last, he was inspecting the forge he'd built for the quiet smith. Finding it sound is the one the saved worlds have put up in every builder's hall, and I will close with it too, because my own last wall is nearly topped out, and the inspection is soon, and a man wants his master's sign-off language ready. He stood a long time looking at the forge. Lit, in use, the smith at work inside. The structure doing the thing structures are for, which is to disappear under the life they hold. And the apprentice asked if he was checking the settling, and Hollis said no, and pointed, one last time, at the whole of it. The forge, the smith, the town beyond, the world that stayed, and said,
Just reading my letter back. That's all retirement is, kid. You spend 50 years writing to the future on the backs of things. And then one day, the future's here, walking around, using the buildings, mostly not falling down, and you get to stand in it for a minute before you go, and read what you wrote, and check one last measurement, the only one that was ever really on the drawings.
He tapped his chest, plumb over the heart, the spot where I keep a card, and he kept nothing but the level he was born with.
Worth meeting? That's the measurement. Everything I ever taught any of you is that one measurement and 40 years of techniques for passing it.
He passed. Every wall we've opened says so. Still holding, Hollis. Good.